Welcome back to another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. As always, I am your host, Howard Holton, and I'm here this week with Tammy from Veracode, and we're going to talk a little bit about security and what security looks like today and maybe what it should look like. So, welcome, Tammy. It's nice to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Howard. Excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you. We started chatting just a few minutes ago about kind of cybersecurity. And if we look at traditional cybersecurity, it's a very tools-focused conversation, right? You have a specific tool that does a specific thing, that has an agent that runs, that monitors some aspect of the computer and then reacts accordingly. Mm-hmm. And that was fine when you had to distribute all these things, and networks were reasonably slow, and everything was contentious, and cybersecurity was a thing that IT did, right? Not that security did. But if we think about kind of today, that's not necessarily how we should be thinking about cyber. Would you agree?
I do agree, very much so. I mean, the data's there. We're no longer building companies. I've been in Silicon Valley tech for over 30 years and 20 in cybersecurity, and always doing disruptive things, but the disruption is no longer about building something that embeds somewhere, that connects in and discovers something new. I think we've figured out how to discover. Now we just have literally a tidal wave of data. And now it's about how do we turn that into action? Because it sure feels like a battle that we don't seem to be winning a lot of the time.
Well, I don't think it's winnable.
Yeah.
Like honestly.
Right.
You first you have the opposition problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like anything else we do in tech, there's no opposition. Right? We're playing golf. Right? There are other people playing golf with us, but how they play golf doesn't affect how we play golf. They don't move the hole away from us.
No.
Right? Like we all hit from the same tee, we all hit to the same hole, we all have the same things in between. Mm-hmm. So whoever gets the best score, they did it on their own.
Right.
Right? And so most things in IT, most things even in business, are those things. Sure, we have competitors, but the reality is they may be better at marketing than we are, but we're not fighting together. Like a customer doesn't call and go, hey, please send your best fighter because your competition is sending their best fighter. We're putting you in the ring and you're going to knock each other out. Right? Even when you do a head-to-head proof of concept, your product stands on its own and their product stands on its own.
Absolutely.
Cybersecurity is the only place where that is not true.
Mm-hmm.
Cybersecurity, your business and everything you bring together in cyber is placed against the opposing team.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter. You are literally fighting them out. You're literally duking them out, even if it happens in a somewhat automated, somewhat autonomous way. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's the only space where that kind of is true. And so it really is critical. It really is important that the signal be amplified as much as possible and the noise fade. But also, there is no end to the problem.
Right.
There's no point that we can conceive of where the offense, right, the opposing team is suddenly going to go, I'm out, I'm done, we're done. All the opposing teams are shut down.
Yeah.
Right. There is no more league. You can go ahead and shut down your cybersecurity. That's never, ever, ever going to happen. Matter of fact, if your cybersecurity is so good that the opponents are like, we're not going to bother because it's just better than we are, one of two things will happen. One, you'll slip up and they'll be right back at the door. Or two, they will get better than you and come back and think they can win.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Right. But there's a great point. You mentioned signal versus noise. I mean, that's where I put a lot of focus because there is just so much noise.
Yeah.
And there's no way that the human brain can sit there and take all this in from the various sources of information and somehow process it in time to enable somebody to do something that's going to make us more protected than we were before that signal came in. And I think that that's been a really big issue. We have no shortage of data, no shortage of instrumentation. I mean, thank goodness. I think you and I, having been in this industry a long time, we've seen days when we didn't have the data.
Sure.
Right? But that is not today.
Sure.
So I love talking about the signal versus the noise. And, how do you get to that signaling at a point where you can process it and whereas I agree, it's not about winning, but it is about how do I get my risk aligned? Where do I see my true urgent risk? Too often, we'll get signaling that's saying, hey, the sky is falling, and we are interrupting our app teams. They're working on some new innovation. They're going to bring us more revenue. They're in flow, and we're banging on the door, saying the sky is falling, and they're not trusting us anymore because we've done this so many times.
Sure.
But so how do we bring more of a trustable signal and turn that signal into action? That's what I've been really thinking a lot about.
Let's double click on that for a minute because I don't want to give the wrong impression.
Okay.
Right? Because we are not saying that cybersecurity teams are creating risk from nowhere.
Definitely not.
Right. But we are saying that our tools aren't really good at properly evaluating what the risk is to us.
Yes.
Right. So when it says, hey, there's a CVE that matches our environment, there is now a vulnerability in our environment, the application team has to take action to close that vulnerability, we're not wrong.
Correct.
But we're also not able to say what is the likelihood that that leads to an exposure that we should really be concerned about.
Right.
Right? Okay, this application is completely internal, or let's use Palo.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Palo, massive CVE, it's being executed in the wild, but you had to expose the management interface to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you do that? That already violates best practice in an enormous way. Like that's, I don't know, if you were to list out the top 5 best practices, number 1 is no any rules.
That's right.
Like number 2 is probably don't expose the management interface to the internet.
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
Right. So that's a huge flaw, but at the same time, it's a huge flaw that you shouldn't been subjected to.
Right.
Right.
Definitely.
And so that's the piece that tends to be missing.
Yes.
Right. It's also, it doesn't help that this is a hugely sensational space.
Yeah.
Right? And we kind of like to see greatness fall as human beings. And so, the first part of the message is huge flaw in Palo Alto. The second part of the message never gets transmitted. Mm-hmm. Right? It doesn't make the headline. You got to read deep into the article to find, actually, yes, this doesn't affect us because it's not exposed in there. Or it doesn't affect us in the same way. The risk score shouldn't be the same.
Yeah.
Now, that does mean if an attacker is already in our network, that they then have access to that Palo firewall interface, and thus that's another point of access that they have. Sure. Yeah. I don't want to minimize. But the security teams aren't there is no malice in them being wrong. And they're not wrong. Yeah. They just don't have all of the information in the way that best services the organization. Right?
I think it has a lot to do with context. And obviously, we come with our own point of view, whether that's as individuals and our experience, but then combine that with the tools. So all this great tooling, all this instrumentation and security, it's coming at it from a certain angle.
For sure.
And I think that's been the big thing that concerned me is that we're definitely trying to surface as much as possible from that perspective, from that point of view, from that focus. However, when it comes to risk, we have to have a 360-degree view on the context. So to your example, we may have a very intense vulnerability. We have a big threat, but hey, what if in that area that we've identified it's not even internet facing, or there's no sensitive data, or it happens to be in an area that we didn't even realize is, something we've kind of faded out on the side, yet we've got a bigger problem somewhere else. So I think it's about how
there's an infinite number of things, right?
Yeah.
So like within my configuration, I've already got that VLAN. It's on a VLAN by itself. There's only one user that has access to it. There's 3 different logins that like it's already an outdated application. So I've done other things. I'm surrounded by other rings of security, right? To effectively say I don't trust this thing to begin with. Well, a new CVE for that probably shouldn't be a priority and shouldn't show up in my security tools on my top 10 list, no matter how big of a CVE that happens to be.
Yet, although it's very surprising, even within a large platform vendor, how little communication is between these products. I mean, you brought up Palo Alto, I didn't, but it's crazy how Panorama doesn't talk to Prisma Cloud, and how are we as an organization supposed to really see the true, most critical threat? Because this is all about.
It shouldn't be a problem though, right? Because most organizations only have 3 or 4 tools.
No.
Somewhere between 40 and 50, let's say. Somewhere between 40 and 60
Yeah.
On average, is what enterprises have for the number of security tools.
Yeah.
Right. That means there is probably no one person that even has login access to all those tools, but that means everybody probably has somewhere between 5 and 10 tools that they have responsibility to.
Right.
Right. That's a crazy number of tools. That also means there are 42 systems of record. 50, 55 systems of record inside a company, right? How many tools you have.
Absolutely.
All of which are telling a different story about your current security posture.
That's right.
Inside your organization.
And I bet they don't have the same data model.
No.
They don't call things the same thing.
No.
They don't easily play nice with each other, even if they're under the same brand.
Because
a lot of acquisitions
correct. Because just like your enterprise did an M&A, and they have a different security posture, and they have a different architecture, and they have a different design to their tech stack than you.
Right.
So does everything else that everybody else M&As.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and that's also, you as a, CISO, your organization doing probably multiple acquisitions, mergers.
Correct. It's exactly the same.
What is viewed as policy, what is viewed as, compliant, and what is not. Even that, the language and under what circumstances.
Yeah.
So we're kind of left with a situation of a ton of data, maybe a lot of noise, and how do we get to what matters most? Like, what's our next move? Because to your point, you're saying, you don't ever win. It's not like we can stay as an organization. We have 0 vulnerabilities, 0 risk, 0 misconfiguration. That means you're not operating. Right? And
no, 100%.
100%.
Or like you're a small family farm that only sells to the local farmers market.
Right. You're not even on e-commerce.
In which case, not an audience for this podcast.
No,
so it's fine.
not an audience. Yeah,
But if you're an audience for this podcast, there is no possible way you can actually say, we've won, we're closing the doors.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what drew me in, because I really jumped into cyber way before it was cool. I don't know about you, Howard, but I'm talking do you remember 20 years ago when I got asked to be in this space, I was like, no, who cares about it, right? It is just so different today, but back then, people weren't even worrying about how you used your social security number. Wouldn't even have been something, maybe certain groups, but
that's not what I'm laughing about.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because the person that developed the social security number, it was for registration in the military, and he was very specific to say, this should never be used to identify an individual. Very firm on this should never be used to identify individuals. So what did we do? We identified individuals.
Yeah,
I wrote a piece of software in 1992-ish.
Okay.
Could have been 91, could have been 93, to track logins to a Novell server, logins and actions on a Novell NetWare 312, I think, server.
Yeah.
Because we had a malicious user that we needed to track down and find. So I've been in the security game since before we were calling it cybersecurity.
You're OG.
It wasn't really called that.
Howard's OG.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
No, I was walking around Silicon Valley. I grew up in Silicon Valley, multi-generation, which has very odd. My great-grandfather helped build the Golden Gate Bridge as a laborer. Yeah. Yeah. So we were like, where are you from? No, I'm from here, right? And I thought
I'm from here.
Yeah. My people and their people and their people are from here, and I thought I'm not going to be in tech.
Right.
How cliche, right?
So did your people read the San Francisco newspaper when Mark Twain was a local writer for the San Francisco? I mean, that would be a really neat piece of Americana.
I wish, because my dad keeps a lot of stuff. And so did his dad and his dad. I wish he kept that. But looking at, back on cyber, it was like, okay, it really felt like there was an opportunity to truly protect what was being attacked. And I spent 18 years of my career dedicated to data-centric encryption. My whole thing was, oh my goodness, when the bad guys get it, it has no value. I wanted to turn all the gold into fool's gold. And we made a lot of innovations there, a lot of disruption, and helped a lot. But then it started to get to a point where it was like, wow, because we're in this amazing era of data, there is so much intelligence that when I was running data privacy and protection at this one company, I was like, I can't possibly take all this in, and so many things were contradicting. But then when I would pull back and go, but what is this tool's perspective? And they're trying to be the best they can be at their craft. So it's like we're getting paid by the word, by the finding, right? And that's really become so overwhelming that it's now like a tidal wave of data. And how do I navigate through? How do you navigate as an organization? Because nobody has infinite resources. We obviously do not have infinite time. So how are we going to play it?
It's also not solvable.
It's not.
If you had infinite resources, it still wouldn't be solvable, because there are companies that effectively have infinite resources that have not solved the problem, and they would. This is a huge problem, right?
Yeah.
Amazon has effectively infinite resources, and yet AWS is not perfectly secure.
Exactly.
Right? Same with Microsoft, same with Google, same with insert name of company here. They may not have public hacks, but they still field tremendously large cyber teams to do effectively the same thing that every cyber team does.
Yeah.
It is not a solvable problem, and we really need to focus on it is not a solvable problem. How do we mitigate it? Oh, it's mitigatable. Right? Because again, to my point before, Amazon is not constantly hacked.
Correct.
No one is constantly hacked, so it is mitigatable.
Yes.
So how do we make sure we're focused on the right things so that we're fiscally responsible with the money given to us by the board and by our CEO and by our CFO, so that we're able to mitigate the risks that are real? Well, the number one thing is, what risks are real?
Yes. And how do we take the fact that we know the data is there, but how do we, without becoming companies in our own right that are huge analytics companies, and focusing on that when, hey, if I'm a car company, yes, I'm a data company above all, but is that what I want to spend all my time on when I should be, staying in my critical lane of innovation? So how do we make this data talk to each other and be able to boil up what the best of the best signals, and to your point, avoid the noise? Because too often I would also hear from my teams how, they're taking the best prioritization that they can see inside any of these silos, and they're doing what? They're investigating it.
Yeah.
Trust but verify. Well, the verify path was leading to so many benigns because we weren't taking in consideration all the other contexts like we were talking about. And then also too many times, sometimes it's a false positive, but those benigns it wasn't wrong. It just wasn't taking in the full picture. It just wasn't
appropriate to the organization in its current state at this current time.
And it's not, would it be nice if I could address it? But yes, but I do not have infinite capability. So therefore, I need to put those precious resources on what matters most.
Right.
And that's what's been keeping me up at night, is how do we take all these great products, these different companies that are giving great perspective through their lens, but somehow correlate that and give some degree of evolved intelligence about where to put those finite resources. I feel like that's one of the best things we can do right now, and in the quest of understanding risk, aligning risk, and doing the best we can because we know we can't fully eradicate it.
Sure. So let's say you're a CISO.
Yeah.
Right? Where you're talking to just a room full of CISOs. And they're all some level of greenfield. Right? They got modern investment they need to make.
Okay.
Right? Next year's budget spending is coming up, and you've got free access to all the green money.
Yeah.
What are the 5 things that you would say to do? Like, here's your 5-step punch list. What do you think that punch list would kind of look like?
Okay, so I think one of the top things on the punch list has to be being able to see that data in such a way that we can get the cream off the top. Like, what is the most critical? So I would say looking at things that are more in that security posture management space. But then the other thing, like having been, always on the side of, building something new and disruptive and competing in these spaces, realize it's so easy to blame the tool and the product, and that's not usually where it is. I think that too many companies are spending a lot of valuable time and money thinking, if I just get it a little bit better CNAP solution, for example, or whatever it may be.
Sure.
So I spend all this time and money because I think it's the problem with the tool, but the reality is the data's there. It's one piece. It's one part of the puzzle. And we need to be able to pull that data together to unlock what it was trying to do from the beginning, was to prioritize through its perspective, but needing that kind of more context, like taking in information about identity and access management, taking in information about the policies and the controls that have been put in even from the people. Like, it's not just the tooling, but also like figuring out where we're going to pick our battles. So if I'm going to place of course, but I'm also a huge believer, the other way I would place money is build teams where people thrive, where they're heard and seen, because we all know, you can't deny there's a major human factor here. And when the data shows that such a high percentage of employees are actively disengaged because we're not creating cultures where people feel appreciated, and cyber in particular, oh my goodness, like you're like either not, it's not talked about, or we have had a massive breach. Like you're the zero or you're quiet, right? So
what do you guys even do? What do I even pay you for?
Yeah.
I don't see you ever doing anything. Or what do I even pay you for? We just had a breach.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Thankfully, we're seeing some of that change, right? Like we're seeing boards. It used to be, don't ever let us get hacked. Cool, give me money. No. I don't want to do that either.
Yeah.
Now it's very much, when are we going to get hacked and how bad is it going to be? Like, we know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Just tell me how bad it's going to be. And so the conversation really needs to be, it's going to be this bad. For this amount of money, it could be this bad. For this amount of money, it could be this bad. And for this amount of money, it could be this bad. Pick how much money you're going to give me, and that's how bad it will be.
Yeah.
Like, pick how bad you want it to be based on the investment.
Yeah.
Like, we need to change the dialogue.
Yeah.
And we really do need to make sure that our people feel appreciated, that they feel welcome, that they feel wanted.
Yeah, this is fundamental. I mean, just imagine how much more productivity getting to what we're signed up to do if we are actively engaged, because we enjoy, and every statistic says it's not about the mission, it's about the person next to you, in front of you, behind you, right? So how do we build more connection? So that would be, I know it sounds a little out of the box, but I really believe those types of things are critical. I mean, obviously we've got this whole, I'd love to get through this discussion and not use these two letters, AI, but, we are where we are. And there's just a level of, we need to be very conscientious about how we're approaching these things and also understand. So I did this thing over Thanksgiving that was kind of silly and fun where, so even though I'm like math nerd underneath it all, I used to love writing poems and writing music when I was a kid, and I'm starting to get back into those things that work other parts of my brain. So I decided for all 9 people sitting with me at my Thanksgiving table, I wrote a poem for them that was very personal and about them. But then I thought, wouldn't it be fun, because I printed it out and I put it underneath their setting, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I did a picture? Well, I told you I'm a math major, okay? I am not good at drawing or any of that. I wish I was. But I thought, hey, what about AI? This will be fun. I'll play with it, right? So I used AI to create some visuals to go along with the poem,
That's
right?
So cool.
It was the most hilarious thing. And it really emphasized how fast, and literally I watched the thing turn for maybe 2-3 seconds, and I had a cool, oh wow, it was cool. But when you really looked at it, I mean, like, so wrong. Like, it did not matter that I said, that my dad has hazel eyes like me. He had blue eyes.
Right.
Even when I tried to refine it and say, no, love the image, but give him blue eye or hazel eyes. No, it could not get it. And the more I tried to play with it, the worse it got.
Yeah.
And it started to become just so hilarious. And it was like, yes, we've got speed. Yes, we get something that starts out very valuable compared to how much time was put in. But I think one of the latest data points is, looking at things like, we got through the lens of code generation, saying like 40%. You may know more than me, Howard, but the last data point I saw was 40% of the code that's generated has security flaws in it. So we're running faster and we're implementing so many things. So when I think about, back to your list, I would definitely also look at ways, kind of joke about it. You may have Copilot. Where's our wingman for
Sure.
Copilot. I need a wingman here that's able to see as we're introducing flaws into this massive, leap fast capability. How can I also interject safety, controls, and visibility so that I know so how am I having checks and balances in an environment that may give you some pretty funky results. So
For sure, right? That there's definitely a risk to AI, and the biggest risk that I see for AI is, let's just assume for a second, AI is 60% good.
Yeah.
Like it on the scale of 0 freaking terrible to 100 perfect. It sits at about a 60%.
Yeah.
Right. I might be, let's just say I'm absolutely spectacular and I'm a 92, but I'm only a 92 in a couple of areas.
yeah.
In most areas, I'm somewhere between a 0, I don't ever do that, and like a 35.
Okay.
Like me, art, I don't know, what is stick figures, a 7% maybe?
yeah.
Right?
Okay,
Poetry, I'm at 11%.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I use AI for those things, which I do,
Yeah.
and it bumps that to a 60%, that's fantastic. That's a
Winning.
massive improvement.
Yeah.
But if I were to use AI in places where I'm a 90%,
Yeah.
it's going to be worse than me. Well, of
Right.
course it is.
Right.
Right? So I don't use AI for those things. Right?
There you go.
There seems to be this big push
Right.
that AI can do all these things. Sure, it can, but to the 60th percentile.
Right.
So let's not rely on it
Yeah.
as the authority when we have 90th percentile.
Yeah.
But let's absolutely use it when we have an 11 percentile.
But what about the speed factor,
Well,
right?
the
Let's say
speed is
92% Howard, but it takes you, 10 weeks to build
Sure,
this
sure.
new thing, and this can be done in 10 seconds. How do you
Well, then it's a
balance
question of,
that?
do I need 92%?
True.
Right? Then it's also a question of, if I were to start at 60%, so I'm already starting on second base,
That's right.
can I carry it across the finish line that
Yeah.
much faster?
Yes.
Right? We just need to not think about it as AI has the ability to replace us. The other thing I really want to focus on is a lot of what we're talking about comes down to a human problem. And
Yeah.
the human problem is one of dimensionality.
Mhm.
Humans can only keep track of a certain number of things,
Yes.
so dimensions, at any given time.
Yeah.
If you've got 45 different security applications in your interfaces in your environment,
Yeah.
well, you've exceeded the number humans can keep track of by about 44.
Yeah.
Right? Like somewhere between 3 and 10 is the max number.
Yeah.
The more complex those things are, the fewer the number is, right? So
Right.
can we use AI tools to reduce the sprawl and start giving us these consistent roll-ups that allow us to say, hey, like, this may not be perfect, but here's
Right.
the thing you should focus on right now.
Yeah.
And it's better than the thing you would have focused on and wasted 5 hours of research to come back and go, well, that actually wasn't an issue.
Right.
Right? Can we
Yeah.
lower that hit rate
Yeah.
or that failure rate so that we're hitting more frequently? It's not going to get us perfect,
Right.
right? But can it lead us in the direction so that a 6 hours of research to find out it wasn't a problem is now 15 minutes of research to find out it wasn't a problem, right? Or in the 100 things we research, investigate in a week,
Mm-hmm.
right? And 7% of those were actual things. Can we get that up to 67% of those things are an actual thing? And
Yes.
those are places where AI and analytics and data science can really strongly help us.
Absolutely.
Right? Not to mention the story value, right? Because we tend to investigate kind of individual points and have to build the story ourselves. If we're looking at a broad landscape of data and we're effectively seeing all the data, we can start to pull together story points out of those and say, hey, here's the story of this incident, here's the story of this attack, here's the story of everything that needs to be investigated, right? The kind of holistic view
Yeah.
of an individual security problem, which then
Yeah.
helps us do our risk management better, helps us do our investigation faster, helps us really focus and key in on those things that have real potential for damage inside our organization.
I love that because the first problem we were talking about is how do I figure out what is truly the most urgent, the signal that I'm getting that I need to respond to. But the next big part of the puzzle is how to respond to it. And too often, we're also leaving our teams without the actionable information about origin, about root cause. Where did this happen? Where is the issue?
Yeah.
What team? Who's the best person on that team to maybe address this? Because there's a lot of moving pieces in our environments, and we can't just put someone on it and think they're not going to break something while they try to
Sure.
fix something else, right?
That's never happened.
Never, right? So I think that ability to now move into how do I trace it back to origin? How do I get root cause data? And then what if I can actually take action not with a root solution?
Right.
So something that's going to eradicate, say, a number of things with one move. Do you remember that game on the PCs? What was it called? It had all the flags, and you would find the bomb. Yes. Did you ever play that? Because I mean, we didn't have a lot of games like that.
Only like 400,000.
Exactly. Okay. So remember how when you could get enough signaling that you clicked a box and then like a bunch of
And the whole thing exploded away? Yeah.
Is it just me, or was that like a great feeling?
Felt so good.
Right?
Yeah.
To me, that's root solutioning. If I can pick
Yeah.
the right thing to do where I get that whoosh effect, come on, winning. And please, let's, celebrate those heroes that find that, right, and make that happen. Instead, we're working hard, but are we working smart?
Sure.
Right?
Well, I mean, let's use the Minesweeper example. Right?
Yeah.
Today, what you're presented with is the Minesweeper board.
Yeah.
And you just kind of go, well, based on the information I have, I'm going to click this box and hope I don't hit a mine.
Yes.
And then hope I get some sort of numbers that I can then start setting flags.
Right.
Right? But what we're looking at, like if this converts to a data solution that's backed by a reasonably smart AI, what you're going to get is all of the spaces with no mines is going to start. That's how your board's going to start.
Yeah.
Your board's going to start as though you clicked that thing and the whoosh already happened.
Right.
It's not going to fully, it's not going to say everything that's left is a flag.
Yeah.
But it is going to say there is a flag that needs to be placed because there's a bomb touching every one of these squares.
Yeah.
But all these other squares, there's no bomb.
Yeah.
Right? Already you've eliminated 40% of the game.
Right.
Right.
And that's why I think, ASPM with AI, these ways of being able to pull that data together. Now, like you've said all along, it's not going to be perfect.
Correct.
But you know what? If you just moved so much closer to that root problem and the root solution to address it, and understanding what is that impact going to have on risk compared to the other, million moves I could make with my finite resources. Like, to me, that is an area that has not had enough impact in our space. Like, I think that's one of the frontiers that we're now walking into, is that it's not about just one area of our program and getting some signaling. It's like, how do we pull up and see that and leverage things like AI, leverage ways to correlate this data to get enough context into it that it's real world, not in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going.
So I think there's a couple things that we really need to focus here. First is you're not reducing people.
No.
It's an infinite game. It's an infinite problem. You don't have enough resources to solve it. You cannot cut back on resources.
No,
so this is
can't.
not an alternative to people. You're not going to be able to reduce your heads. The goal is to help them focus on things that provide actionable value.
Yes.
Put it that way.
Yes.
The second thing is this is why we say all security problems can really come down to data problems. But number three is it requires you to know thyself. Right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't provide your business context,
Yes.
right, then you effectively are going to end up in the same place. You're going to still end up with, cool, the thing you need to focus on is the thing that has a CVE that calculates out to 10. Okay, but that's behind 4 other pieces of security. But really, there's no way for the application to natively know that if you don't know yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have a way to provide that back and say, hey, these are here's the things that really matter to me.
Yeah.
But also to go, I'm not perfect.
Right.
Right? Because as the tools get better, they're going to find flaws. They're going to find, they're going to become kind of investigators. Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to go, well, I know for sure that is wrong and here's why it's wrong. But also, oops, I didn't know that existed. And you have to be able to accept both of those things.
And you do need to have people that understand sort of the different aspects of our environments. Like, we both lived through this whole thing of, the cloud, right? And we remember back when we were building monolithic, applications.
I mean, we're still building monolithic applications. I'd love to say we're perfect at being cloud native.
But things were so much more isolated and, one unit and one, binary. And now we're at a point where there is so much change that has happened. And, Moore's law is on fire right now in the sense of kind of how fast things are changing. one of the things I've noticed working with so many companies is that you talk about the people. It's not that we still need the people, but you know what? How do certain industries attract
For sure.
and keep the people? Like the disparity between an offer that you can get at one of the big CSPs right now or in one of the big financial services companies. But you know what? If I'm an attacker, I'm thinking, where am I going to get? So we have just as much.
I mean, that's why manufacturing, healthcare, and SLED are the top attacked industries for cyber.
Yeah.
Because these three places spend less than anybody else.
Right.
Manufacturing
Yeah.
would include CPG, would include retail.
Right. So
But
too often
manufacturing,
the
retail.
skills, right, that we're either struggling to take the time to retool, or we're not able to hire and keep the people that we need. So there is a level of understanding. It's not just textbook level, it's also like experience.
Mhm.
And so what I'm also excited about in regards to some of the areas that AI and ASPM can give us is, can you get me there faster? Like, okay, maybe I'm a wannabe poet, but we know Tammy is
Sure.
not a wannabe illustrator.
Sure.
I mean, no skills. You think you're a 2? You wouldn't even want to see my stick
I
figure.
was being nice to myself on it too.
All right.
I didn't want to cry on my pillow later.
Oh, okay. But, you know, this, even though what I got back was like laughably inaccurate in certain areas, oh, was it spot on?
Sure, it's way better
In other
than
areas, and was it cool? And yes, you know, my mom cried when every single person read their poem, but the laughter from
Sure.
my 24 and 21-year-old about the pictures that it generated about dad and grandpa were, you know, this will be a Thanksgiving talked about for a long time.
That's awesome.
So, and I mean, there's no way there would have been a picture had
Right,
it not been for
right.
AI. I mean, let's be clear. I was not going to bust out my stick figure
Yeah, for sure.
wannabe. Yeah. So there's a lot of, so let's make sure we're also finding ways to leverage, how do we get people's skills up? How do we leverage what they do know and amplify or augment? So it's not ever about replacing the people and the experience, but also if we put in certain programs and we have certain technology leverage, can we bring in a resource that's more approachable for us?
Sure.
You know, because
Well,
we're not going to pay $400,000, $300,000 as a certain industry player for one cloud security architect,
For sure.
right? We can't seem to be able to sell that for some reason, even though
There's also not an infinite number of those people.
There is not.
Like let's say tomorrow we decided that everyone would pay $400,000 for their cloud security architects and up.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Fang is immediately going to go, cool. Then we're paying $800,000. Right. They're immediately going to go, cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're just going to create this disparity
That's
because
fine,
we
yeah.
want the best of the best of the best, and we can afford to pay more than whatever the market decides is market rate to recruit those people, and we're just going to be in the same problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that AI should allow, because it's going to change the game, it's going to change the game away from kind of the button clicking rote activity.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's going to do the button clicking rote activities.
Mm-hmm.
That means it's incumbent upon all of us that work in this industry to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Be curious. If you don't find yourself able to be curious, well, you're disengaged. If you don't find that your people are curious, they're disengaged. If you don't find that you as a leader are curious, then you're disengaged. You have to re-engage.
Yes.
And that is going to become really, really critical. We don't need people that put in time. We don't need people that click buttons. We don't need people that just follow a manual, because I can program an AI to do that. We'll be able to very shortly.
Yeah.
So you're going to be required to be curious at all levels inside an organization. And that is something that we really need to get our heads wrapped around as employees, not employers. As employers, the longer we take to get there, the better it's going to be for employees that are not curious to figure out they need to be curious.
Yeah.
Right? But the first thing that's going to happen is people are going to start, there's going to be layoffs.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it. I'd love to say there's not. But there's a lot of companies that just don't have, they don't think about that resource as being important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to immediately go, well, cool, I can use AI to replace all these things. It's going to happen. The best way to prevent that from happening is to be curious. The best way to be resilient if it does happen is to be curious. And carry that curiosity with you everywhere and make that curiosity apparent everywhere you possibly can. For crying out loud, be curious.
But I will say, as leaders, we have to create space for curiosity.
Absolutely.
Because being curious means it definitely prefaces with, we don't know, right?
Correct.
We're curious. And too often, we put our employees into situations where it's like, if you don't know, then you're not delivering.
Correct.
You're
well,
not.
Well, here's the best part.
Yeah.
The absolute
Tell
best
me,
part.
Howard, what's the best part?
The best part is if your organization doesn't foster curiosity, your organization's going to go away.
Absolutely.
Right? Because, if you're not curious, then effectively you're driving to the mean.
Yeah.
Well, if you're driving to the mean, AI can do that today.
Yeah.
Because we're driving to below that watermark of 60%.
Yeah.
You have to be curious to get beyond it. If your organization says, as an organization, we are not curious, cool, then you should recognize that your organization is going to be ripe for disruption at some point, because there is no limit to the scale of AI.
Yes.
So I don't care how big your company is, if it's not curious, it will go away eventually.
Yeah.
You have a target on your back, so your organization must also be curious.
Yes.
Or it is not resilient, it will be disrupted, it will be replaced. And anyone that is currently thinking, oh, that's impossible, no. There's no limit to a dollar acquisition. Right? One dude decided he wanted to buy Twitter and paid $45 billion for it. Right? There is no limit to what could be acquired. And if there is no limit to what could be acquired, and we start acquiring non-curious companies, because you could replace all the people with AI because they're not curious,
right?
And you're effectively buying a book of business and a list of properties, a list of assets, and IP,
yeah.
Why would you not? Seems like that'd be great. Right?
No. Not a place I'd want to be, but
no, I mean, so,
you know.
but it does mean that we all need to start looking for that curiosity.
Yes.
Are we curious as people? Are our teams curious as teams? Like
right.
each of these units continue to get larger and larger, and if we're the CEO, is our company curious? Okay, so here's a great way to measure it.
Okay, tell me.
How many times have you failed?
Huh.
If it's 0, you're 0% curious.
I love this so much.
You're just not curious.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, if
foster an attitude of failure is okay, because it means you're curious.
Yes.
Right? You're never going to find success from curiosity if you're not also finding failure. Failure is part of the path to success.
But that also comes back to culture.
Yeah.
Because if you're not making it safe
correct
for people to fail, like my favorite thing in the 30 plus years that I've been in Silicon Valley doing startups and in cyber is that we're those environments where we could be in a room and we all come at it from different perspectives, and we're going at it, and we are disagreeing, and we are calling out, no, I don't think that's going to work, and what about this, and we're but it's safe to do that, and we walk out of that room having reached a whole nother level that's greater than the sum of the parts.
Yep.
That has to be fostered, and I think that follows with your the failing, the curiosity. But we as leaders are responsible for creating environments where people feel like they can do that and they don't feel like their job is now threatened.
Correct.
Or the way that they kind of get curious and push the limits and the way that they fail, right? It isn't just one way in how we take failure. It's tough. But being able to build that resilience where people know that's where we find the great ahas is really in the failure. I mean, as an athlete for many years, it was not how many baskets I made, playing basketball. It was how many times I missed. What did I not see on that court?
For sure.
That would keep making me evolve my game. And that is like everything we do. So I can't wait to see more companies end up being, I want to be in another company, I'm not saying I'm not today, but companies where I don't want to leave. I will leave because I got a lot of other stuff going on. But I want to talk to these people.
For sure.
It's safe. I want to debate. I want to be curious because you have a different perspective than I do. You lived, your journey was different.
Everyone has a different perspective. You only have one.
And the more I can gather from that by being able to tend to your story and be able to then learn from it, but be able to challenge it too, not just take all of it because I have a different perspective, right? That's when we keep elevating. We keep doing that.
It's so weird growth. The way we penalize failure in business, and yet the people that make ridiculous amounts of money have a ridiculously high failure rate. The best baseball players in the world have a 65% failure rate.
That's the best.
65%, and they're considered the absolute best tens of millions of dollars a year are paid for these people to come out and fail 65% of the time.
Yeah.
And that's best of the best. That's
Yeah.
a 350 batting average, right? Best
Yes.
of the best.
Yes.
Consistent.
Yeah.
Right? Cool, you fail 65% of the time. It's the
Yeah.
only one that I know. I don't know what the failure rate is in football players, but I can't imagine that quarterbacks have a 97% completion rate on passing. They don't.
No.
Right? They have a completion rate of 50% or some crazy thing. Right? So which means the quarterback and the receiver have both failed half of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's crazy, and they make hundreds of millions of dollars in their contract.
Yeah.
So why do we somehow think as business it's good
Yeah.
to have a 0% failure rate? It means you're not
Yeah.
trying.
Especially in tech, right? Especially in cyber and everything. Because, okay, go to LinkedIn right now. You show me one profile, I'm sure there's one, but where anybody talks about the failures, right?
Sure.
Everything's so glossed up, right? And we sort of created this culture that we're supposed to be like, we already know, it's perfect, we got it. We don't got it. Because I will tell you, I think you agree, I don't know, but in the 20 plus years that I've been in cyber, there's no doubt in my mind that the adversary has more in it than we do protecting
For sure.
ourselves. Their
Absolutely.
drivers are usually to live, to eat, to survive, right?
Yeah.
Our drivers are to hit our goals,
Yeah.
keep our
I have
job.
never known a
right?
criminal that didn't have more attachment to the outcome of their
Yeah.
crime
Yeah,
than anyone had to the outcome of their job.
right.
Right? Like those of us that work in legitimate jobs
Yeah.
have far less invested than any criminal I've ever met had in the outcome of their crime.
Right.
Right? So yeah, I think that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Right? We're not risking jail for this stuff.
No.
They are absolutely risking jail for it. They're risking persecution. They're risking prosecution. We
Yeah.
don't have those risks, so we don't have that attachment.
And that
so to
driver.
somehow think
Yeah.
that we don't need to have a level of drive is also weird, is also strange. A level of attachment is also weird and also strange.
Yeah. But we
Right.
need to know they're constantly a step or more
Yeah.
ahead of us. And therefore, we are not being curious. We are not being resilient. We are not failing in order to rise to that next level of breakthrough, that next aha. That we're not trying those things, but
For
then
sure.
piecing together the data from the failure. That's where the next great move is
Yeah.
coming.
100%.
It's coming from. So
100%. So as a leader, if you don't know if you're fostering the right sense of that, ask yourself, when was the last time you talked to your team about a failure that you had?
yes, we all got to go first.
Yep,
I mean,
make
that's
it
a
easy.
fundamental, right? We
Yeah.
gotta, when we go first, we make space for it, and we model it. Like
Sure.
be what we're looking for, and know that first doesn't literally have to mean the first one to speak or the first one to have ever said it, but yeah, being able to, we got to be courageous
Okay.
as leaders.
So one final question, because we're
Okay.
this has been a ton of fun,
Yeah.
but this might be the longest DDT podcast ever.
oh,
But it's been a ton of fun, so that I'm not complaining at all. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that we give people the final thing, most important
all
thing.
right.
How
Okay.
does everybody find you?
Oh, well, you want my contact information? What do you think?
Whatever you want to
Yeah.
tell. So like, where do you work?
Yeah.
How do we get a hold of you? How do we learn
Sure.
more? How do we
Absolutely.
follow you?
Okay, so I'm Tammy Schuring, Schuring, so wouldn't be obvious spelling. And I'm currently run the risk manager area at Veracode. My company was called Longbow. We were acquired in April. I'm based out of Cupertino, California. And yeah, Schuring at Veracode.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And I'm always talking about these things like culture being so important, and big believer in the power story. So I'd love to hear your story and, give you mine in return.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a ton of fun.
Thank you. It's been
And
great,
when
Howard.
We're in a totally cool direction. So
Yeah,
I love the format of this podcast because we get to kind of rabbit hole wherever we find those passion nuggets.
Yeah.
Right?
that's
So
great.
This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Howard.
So this has been another episode of Discovery Disruptions in Tech. I hope you enjoyed it a quarter as much as I did. Again, like, follow, subscribe, and we'll see you on our next episode. Thank you.